My name is Jennifer Thompson, and I'm the Executive Director of NASW New Jersey and Delaware. And we are so incredibly grateful that you're joining us today for this important conversation. As we approach the November elections, we thought it was really important for us to engage in all conversations related to the election, and particularly today around the census and how it relates to the general election. And we are incredibly fortunate to have Patricia Williamson here today to share with us important information about this topic, about data collection, and as it relates to the elections as we approach November. And just a couple of housekeeping items before I turn it over to you, Patricia. You've got a presentation to share, but we certainly encourage everyone in the chat box. You can chat us questions, and I'll be able to filter through them so we can ask those questions. We'll also be watching on Facebook. So if you have questions, you can ask them there, and we'll be able to pop in and ask those on your behalf. We really want today to be a conversation, though, to have all of your questions answered and make sure that you have all the information that you need as we approach November. So with that said, Patricia, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your knowledge, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you for having me, and I'm glad to be here. One of the, when I heard about the National Association of Social Workers, I thought about my mother, who she was a social worker for a few years before I was born. And so this very well could have been an association or a group where she would have come in and felt welcome. And she told me stories about some of the things that she did as a social worker. And so that I know you are truly essential workers. And so I'm more than happy to speak with you today. So I'm going to share my screen and have a conversation with you today about the census. So just a thumbs up from Jennifer to make sure that it's seen. Okay, great. All right. My name is Patricia Williamson. I am the New Jersey Counts Project Director at the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice. This is my contact information, but of course I can bring that in a little bit later. I am, for the Institute was established in 1999, and in part, our mission statement is that our racial and social justice advocacy group seeks to empower people of color by building reparative systems that create wealth, transform justice, and harness democratic power from the ground up in New Jersey. What I do, I oversee a strategic plan. I oversee a group of African-American organizations, civic organizations, groups, nonprofits, and I'm part of a larger coalition called the Census 2020-NJ Coalition, whereas my focus is mostly African Americans, but in that coalition, we also focus on children under 5, on the Latino, Latinx population, Asian Americans, immigrants, and then we have some other groups such as the League of Women Voters, that looks at everyone. And so we all work together to partner with the State Department of State, the Census Bureau, and philanthropic foundations to make sure that New Jersey is approaching that complete and accurate count. So as you know, the census is here. It's not going to be here much longer, but it is here right now. And it is a required count of every person living in the United States. It only comes once every 10 years. And we know that for now, the last date is going to be on September 30th. There is, I just mentioned this here, it's not in a slide, but there was a piece of federal legislation introduced yesterday by Senators Schatz and Murkowski called the Census Deadline Extension Act. And so We are, as the Institute, one of the endorsers of this act, where it will give more time for the census to properly analyze their data, so that it's moving from the December 31st deadline to the president out to April 30th, which was what they requested in May, and then shifting the date that the president would return the information for appropriation from April out to the end of June. So take a look for that, but that just happened yesterday. So we don't know exactly when the end date is, but what we're telling people is to take it today. So a complete and accurate census is essential to ensuring New Jersey receives its fair share of political representation in Washington and the federal funding for the critical programs and social services to which it is entitled. So we'll talk about both of these in a few slides. First, let's look at the funding. The federal government allocates over $700 billion to states and local governments based on census data, and New Jersey receives more than $45 billion of those dollars annually from 2010 forward from the federal government, and that's based in large part on the census. This is not a complete list of what the federal funding supports, but just as an example, in terms of our children, there's school breakfasts and lunches, there's preschool, after school care, child care, summer programs, a lot in the public health space that we've probably noted through this pandemic, WIC, immunizations, maternal and child health, construction of better roads and safer bridges. And then in terms of state grants, there are several grants that are here. National School Lunch Program, I mentioned. The ones that's not here is the federal Pell Grant. There's special programs for the aging, Title III Part C nutrition services, and the Child and Adult Care Food Program. So these are some of the grants that we receive from the federal government that are largely based on census data. They need to know how many of us are here in order to give the proper amount of funding. I'd like to move a little bit to what we're calling hard to count. You may have heard that phrase. They've since changed it a little bit to hard to reach. But what it is, we have 22%, which is almost a quarter of New Jersey's population, that's living in a hard to count area, which is defined by the Census Bureau as 73% or fewer of the people that live in an area called a census tract. It could be a set of blocks in a city. And they did not self-respond. They did not mail their census in 2010. So if you live in a tract that 73% or fewer of the people responded in 2010, that's considered hard to count in 2020. And those are some of the places that we're spending an especially large amount of time on to make sure that we get those areas counted. Most of these populations include people of color, low-income individuals, young children, immigrants, people with low internet access, which is important to note because this year the internet was the primary way that the census was administered, so that everyone can do it that way. Hard to count was also in large households, people who are homeless or move a lot, and most of these communities have the highest poverty rates, and they're in the need the most of the essential services. And so we want to make sure that these residents are counted in 2020. So how are we doing? This chart was created by the Institute 2 days ago. Yes, 2 days ago. And so these are the 11 cities that we've been following for roughly the last 2 years. But in terms of the census, so in the upper left-hand corner, you can see the rates for the United States and for the state of New Jersey. And then you see the 11 cities that we've been following. And underneath each of these you'll see the 2010 rate. And so what you can see is New Jersey is, the self-response rate for New Jersey for 2020 has outpaced the rate for 2010. And you may have seen some of that in social media. We are very happy about this, that we have reached the point where now we should receive more funding in general than we did in 2010. We're receiving at least that and then maybe some more. But we are very concerned about these 11 cities because most of them, at least in this picture, none of them have reached their 2010 rate, much less the 100% rate that we would really want them to have. So there's many other cities like this. We chose some of the largest cities. A lot of these have a large amount of people of color in them, and they're the ones that we've been focused on across the state. So you'll see Newark and Jersey City are the two largest cities. And although New Brunswick, and particularly New Brunswick and let's say Irvington, are not the largest in terms of cities, in terms of the hard to count percent rates, they were very close to 100%. And so we wanted to make sure that we made some inroads in those spaces. Now let's talk a little bit about census and representation. And this is where we're looking at the power portion. So the census data determine how many representatives New Jersey sends to Congress. They are also used to draw state and federal legislative districts. So in 2010, we lost a district. We lost a House representative. And so, and there are now 2 fewer representatives in Congress for New Jersey than in 1990. And that's unfortunate because we need as many voices as possible representing New Jersey in Washington as possible. And that also impacts us here in the state. If you were a district and now you've been spread out and incorporated into other districts around you, your voice is not heard the same way as it was when you actually had your own district. So we do not want to lose another district. We're not at the top of the list to lose a district, but given the pandemic and not having a full count and what, the things that are going on, it is certainly a possibility. And so we do want to continue for these last 2 weeks and make sure that we can get out and have as many people counted as possible. I also want to mention here, an accurate census 2020 is necessary to ensure New Jersey communities are represented in Trenton as well. So the census numbers are actually used for our legislative districts here in New Jersey. We don't change the number of districts, but we do change where they are and how they're sized and how the map looks based on the numbers in terms of population of any given municipality. And that goes into my next conversation. So as I mentioned, the Institute does advocacy. And so this was one of the areas where advocacy was important for us. We talk about New Jersey redistricting and putting that on the ballot. Even before I say what's on here, the reason we were looking at redistricting before the pandemic, but after the pandemic hit, we realized that the census might need more time to actually be counted. And if what I mentioned a few minutes ago happens, where the deadlines for the census are extended into 2021, we would not get our information on time to do what we usually do in terms of redistricting for our primaries next year. And so, having said that, this November, we will have a ballot question to amend our New Jersey Constitution that will change our legislative redistricting process. It calls for a permanent change where in any cycle that we do not receive census reapportionment data by February 15th, New Jersey will continue to use the existing map and delay redrawing its maps for 2 years. Now, we at the Institute oppose this measure. It's called ACR 188, and here's some of the reasons why. We had a very good op-ed that was, just looking for the date. The op-ed was out on August 19th, almost a month ago, by my director, Henil Patel. And these are some of the reasons that we oppose this measure. The first one is that we know that New Jersey is significantly more diverse than it was 10 years ago. And using our current map for 2 more years, it means that the communities of color are going to be denied their fair share of representation for another 2 years. And we only receive census data early as a courtesy. So New Jersey and Virginia are the only ones in a typical year where we would receive information early for well, this year would be 2021, but I'll just say for our 01 year, the year after the census, because we're the only 2 states that have a major election in the 1 year. And so we only receive it early as a courtesy. So if this is passed, anytime in the future, if we receive the data on February 16th, we would be forced to delay redistricting. So if we didn't receive it as a courtesy, this measure would go into effect. Thirdly, this is a permanent change, even though it was really to address COVID-19. And lastly, this will not affect how the Census Bureau conducts their work. Whether they finish in September or October, they're still going to have to finish their work regardless of what this measure will do. And so lastly, our position from the Institute is this is not actual reform. So advocates, along with us, have been calling for real reform for years. We need a more transparent and more independent process that prioritizes racial equity. So that's our statement on that. In terms of what you can do, we have a few ideas in terms of just the census in general. The first one is becoming a trusted messenger, and that you already are. As a social worker, you are going into people's homes. They trust you. They already know about you or what you do. And if you were to mention the census and help them understand how important it is and where the money, where the funding goes and how it would help them in their community, they're more likely to take the census and complete it than for somebody that they don't know, or perhaps even the enumerators that come to the door. They certainly may not know them as well as they know you. And so if it's something that you would consider doing, letting them know, they can either use what they have in terms of their paper form, they can mail it, or they can go on the website, or they can call, which a lot of people don't realize. There are phone numbers in English, Spanish, and 10 other languages that they can actually call in language and get the same 10 questions asked and have them answered. It's roughly 10 questions, 10 minutes that will change the next 10 years of their lives. So that is a specific way that you can be a trusted messenger, and that's something you can do just on your everyday job. Some other things you can do, this is another one in terms of meeting people where they are. Of course, you're doing that physically with your profession, but if you are also, that's physically, but sometimes you have to think about it educationally or emotionally, where some people have a strong distrust of the government and they've heard some things that may not be true. So for example, if someone asks, you can let them know the citizenship question is not on the census. It used to be a year ago, but the Supreme Court had it removed. And for a lot of people, the damage was done because that's what they didn't hear that part. But when they actually see the 10 questions that are there, then they realize, well, this isn't so bad. I mean, all it really asks you are your name, your date of birth, your gender, your race and ethnicity, whether you own a home or own or rent the home that you're in. It'll ask for your phone number in case it needs to they need to clarify something later, and how you are related to the head of household. And that's it. They don't ask for money. They don't, and also on the other side of it, they don't send this to your landlord. It doesn't go to ICE. It doesn't go to the IRS. It goes straight to the Census Bureau. And basically, after they count you as a number, as a statistic, they lock the box for 72 years. And after that, it goes into the National Archives, and it's open so that people can look at it on Ancestry.com. So that's 72 years from today. So that's important as well. These are just some examples of some of the things that we did outside. We were able to partner with the SOMA, which is South Orange Maplewood. That's an action group, but they had a sewing network that they created at the beginning of the pandemic. And we were able to they were able to create masks for us, homemade cloth masks. They have about 100 volunteers that receive donations. They make the masks, and we were able to give them out in certain places. In the lower left-hand corner, I'm with the Complete Count Committee of Plainfield. The person who is over SOMA Sewing Network is to my right, and then the people flanking us are people from the Plainfield Complete Count Committee. We donated 500 masks to them, and they give those to different people as they're giving them census material at food banks or pantries, at COVID-19 testing sites. And since this was in the summertime, they were also going to schools, and as they were providing school lunches to people during the day, they would also stick a mask in there and also put in census material. They would also stand there because we had partners that we were able to loan partners iPads and laptops, and they were able to help people on the spot take their census. The picture on the right, there's a magnet on the car that we were able, through a grant from the Fund for New Jersey, we were able to purchase all kinds of things, but that one is a car magnet. And we were able to do car caravans and things of that nature so that we could get the word out safely, because we did want to continue social distancing and make sure that no one was impacted negatively by being outside. So the car caravans I just mentioned, civic engagement cookouts, where you can safely still have a cookout or some sort of a gathering where there is food involved and there's fun involved, but there's also the civic engagement piece where we're encouraging people to register to vote as well as to complete their census. Friendly city competitions have worked among certain cities where the mayors competed for getting a higher self-response rate in a certain amount of time, and one took another to pizza. I believe that happened in Essex County in 2 different municipalities. And so while we have a window of opportunity, go outside, socially distance, and engage people. The people that are not counted at this point, most of them don't want to be counted, and they need to have the conversation with you. Social media is very helpful, but there are, as mentioned earlier, a lot of people are not necessarily on social media if they don't have internet. And so we need to actually make sure we are having conversations with people. Another thing that's not on here, call your family members, because even if you're sending something on social media, you're just sending it to your network. And so likely they may have already completed the census. But chances are, if they reach out to their networks 2 or 3 generations away, someone will be out there that did not complete their census. And so we do want to encourage people to call 5 people and then have them call 5 people and so on. And so these are just some references in terms of how you can find some of the statistics that I put in the presentation, and also how you can, the last line, census hard to count maps, that's something that you can use if you want to see your rates, your self-response rates on a daily basis. They do not update on the weekends, but every day after around 3 o'clock, they do update between Monday and Friday. And that is that presentation. So
thank you so much. This is really great information. We appreciate it. We have a lot of questions that have come in, so we're just going to dive into them, if that's all right with you.
That's fine.
So there's a question in our Zoom chat regarding the hard to count. And the question is, while there are percentages of residents counted on the low side, I noticed that in some cities, there is much greater difference between the number counted in 2010 and the number counted in 2020. Do we know if there are specific circumstances in these cities that make it harder to count residents in some cities where the rates are similar to 2010?
That's a great question. Most of the cities that I shared on the screen, with the exception of East Orange, all of them are less than 2010. East Orange, this week they should surpass their number, which we're very happy about that. Although that number is still in the 50s. So part of that we're thinking had to do with the pandemic. There's really no way around it. There were people in those cities that were sick, and then there's others that passed away, those that were left behind, they're bereaved, they're unemployed, or on the other side, they're essential workers. There's so many things going on in the midst of the pandemic. The census is one of the last things that they were thinking about at that moment. And there is data to show, and like I mentioned, most of the cities that all of the cities that I showed you have a large amount of people of color in them. And there is data to show that the Black and Brown communities were more impacted by COVID-19 than some of the other ones. And so with that in mind, that makes it a lot more difficult to have people rally around this. It's, we're sheltered in place. Yes, we were able to get some people to do it while they were in place, but it just wasn't first in mind. What changed a little bit was really after the death of George Floyd. That really made a difference, because at that point, when we started to talk about racial injustice and we talked about Black Lives Matter, one of the ways Black lives really can matter is making sure Black lives count. And so at the protests and at some of the different at the protests and at some of the places where we had the opportunity to speak, we made sure to add to that, hey, now that you're out here, make sure that you have a lasting impression. You want to register to vote. You want to complete your census. And at the Institute, we also have a list of 10 things that you can do now that you've said Black Lives Matter. And I'll try to remember to put that in the chat, but there's 10 different things. Those are just 2 of them in terms of things we can do. So what I think is part of the problem is we already had the issues of people not wanting to be counted. And then you add to that the people that wouldn't have minded being counted, but they just weren't thinking about it at the time. So our goal then became, let's get to at least where we were at 2010.
Yeah, there's certainly no shortage of things for people to be focused on right now, and dual pandemics and dual crises, and just, I can imagine even homeschooling your children has really taken your mind off of the census and all the other things you might normally participate in or get to.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Just along the same lines in terms of what people can do, I think that's one of the biggest questions that we hear, particularly from the social work community. They're a group of helpers. They want to stand up and lean in and just get to work and do things. Mm-hmm. Something that was interesting that came up on our call a couple of days ago when we were talking about how do we help people in particularly our clients and the communities that we serve, help with their voting, the idea of being a bearer in submitting their ballots. Can you talk a little bit about any ramifications? Is it possible for social workers to help people complete the census? Are there legal issues in terms of assisting people?
So you are not supposed to complete someone else's census. So when we say help people complete the census, we have to be very mindful of what that means. You can set up your computer or your laptop and let them do it. You know, you can even take them to my2020census.gov to make sure that they're at the right space and let them answer the questions. You can also give them the phone numbers, and you can stand there and watch them and make sure they did it, but you can't physically complete the census for another household. Besides your own, of course, you can do that. So, but that's okay, because if you come with the information, and we have a lot of information at the Institute in terms of flyers that perhaps we can give to you after this call. Like there's one flyer with all 12 phone numbers with the languages, so they'll know, hey, why don't you take, you can just call right now. It takes 10 minutes, and they can call, and while you're there on your visit, they can take care of that. And actually, that's even one of the best ways to do it, because, you may not want to use your own computer, because with the, COVID-19, you have to make sure everything's disinfected and everything. If they use their own phone, they're right there. So you can, that's the extent of your help. So the only other thing you could do, you can't do this with voting. With bearers, you can only, there's only 3 bearers. You can only be a bearer for 3 people. A census taker cannot actually take a paper census from a person. They actually have to give them a self-addressed stamped envelope. And now they already had a self-addressed stamped envelope, but they have to give them another one and have them mail it. Now, that may be something that you can do because it's a self-addressed stamped envelope, but I'm not necessarily endorsing that. That's just something it's more of an area of encouragement of, hey, you need to mail your bills, you need to mail your census too. So that's just something to kind of add in. So we can get them as close as we possibly can without actually doing it. So, but we've seen people do it. I mean, I sat in a park with someone where we had one of our Institute iPads, and after a 20-minute conversation, a very, very hardened young man, but once he felt heard, that was the first thing. And then once we were able to talk to him and help him understand how much of a difference he could make, he sat down at our table at the iPad and he set it up. And when we looked, when he was finished, we saw the confirmation on the top. And so we all, cheered and gave him some swag and some things like that. So it's not that we're taking it for him. We really have to bring them to the point of doing it themselves.
I think that's so important. And I think the next follow-up question, while no one has asked it yet, I'm just waiting for somebody to jump in online, will be, what about for the social workers who are working with clients who have disabilities, who might be unable to physically communicate or to call in and make that phone call, but they can communicate in some way, whether it be technology or something. There are lots of ways that people connect with their clients. How can they help ensure that those individuals are counted as well?
Now, there are exceptions in that case. I may have to come back to you on that. But the 2 that I remember off the top of my head, one of the phone numbers that is available has the TDD number for the hearing disabled. And I also know that there is a form that can be used there's a Braille form for people. Those two off the top of my head are the two that I remember in terms of the disabilities, but there is an exception. I'm going to take a note of this and ask you to send it back to your group. But I want to find out exactly what people can do for those who are disabled. I do remember now a census enumerator can do whatever they need to do. They can absolutely do that. I need to just follow up with you on what an advocate or a trusted messenger can do. That one I need to check.
Great, thank you.
I'm noting that.
We'll have a lot of questions, I'm sure. Another question that has come in regarding ACR 188. What can be done to advocate against that measure? What actions can people take and advocacy efforts can they participate in?
Well, the biggest one, the first thing we can do as advocates, as personal advocates, is to vote no. Because it's on the ballot, there's nothing we can do to take it off. So that would be to vote no. Really just to spread the word, however you want to do that, be it social media or you can certainly come back to us at the Institute. We can provide, additional information and talking points. But that's pretty much however your organization advocates in terms of getting the word out. It would just be the same way. So whatever you need, if you need materials or anything like that, we can certainly provide that. But basically, those are the first things that come to my mind: social media, or as you're talking with people, as you're doing your public education about what's on the ballot, because a lot of people don't know what the public questions are. So that's one of them.
So true. So true that often those issues are so critically important, but no one knows what they are or understands or has any idea. So the more education about them, the better. Right. I guess as a follow-up question to that, will the Institute be running a formal campaign, an education campaign around this, or are there informational materials that can be handed out?
We are part of a larger coalition. We won't be running our own campaign just due to resources, human resources. There's not that many of us, but we are part of a larger group with the League of Women Voters, which there's a much larger group, and any materials that they provide on this that we will also be able to, we will plan to use and disseminate.
Great. I want to get back to one of the things that you touched upon just a couple of minutes ago, the idea that you had sat down and talked with an individual who was sort of reticent about engaging in the process and being counted. Love to hear your thoughts on how people, and particularly social workers, can connect with individuals who might sort of be adverse to participating in the system. We hear that a lot lately. Oh, I'm not going to engage. It's an oppressive system. This is my way of opposing and taking a stand. How can people help explain the impact of being counted and sort of address some of the concerns that you hear most often? Really, how can we help people understand that it's more harmful not to be counted than it is to be counted?
Great question. One of the things that I used to do when I was able to speak to people in person, I would have the whole group stand up and represent a city, most likely the city that we were literally congregating in at the time. And I'd use an actual example, but I'll just make up one at this point. Let's just say that particular city had a 50% self-response rate from 2010. I'd have half of the room sit down, and the half of the room that was standing, I would give them air money. I'm not giving anyone real money, but I gave them air money, and they were very happy because they completed the census and they received the money. But then they became upset so the people that were sitting down were already upset. But then the people that had the money, they had to share their money with the people that were sitting down, because the whole city is what the federal government is giving to the people that they saw, they're thinking, okay, this is the city, but the whole city is in the whole room. And basically what that means is no one gets what they need for essential services for the schools. If you have overcrowded schools, if you have those roads that are too small, you just don't have enough lanes, and it's just everything is overcrowded. A lot of that comes back to census data. If you only had half of what you only asked for half, and so if you don't ask for it, it's not going to get better. And then if you look at census data and how it's used for businesses, if a business is considering coming to a certain city, they may change their mind if they don't think there's enough people there to actually make sense, to make a profit. So almost anything that they can think of, that they can touch, police, fire, hospitals, anything that has federal impact, that comes with federal funding, is going to be impacted if enough people don't get counted. So it's not even just that one person. Once that one person is counted, they need to make sure their neighbors are counted too, because you want a street that's counted. You want a city that's counted. And it's very difficult for people to look around every day and to see, what they see and say, this is, how am I going to make a difference? And what we've continued to tell people, we're really trying to get them to see how much they matter, how much that household, and just how much they, it does make a difference. And if you don't do anything, then you certainly won't see any changes. That we can almost guarantee that. But if you do something, there's a much better chance that you're going to see something different. You put in something for your community. And so sometimes those are just some of the, at the heartstrings, just some of the things that we like to tell people in terms of taking the chance and going ahead and being counted. But we also have to layer that with letting people know that it's safe, because we don't want people to feel like they've done it and now they've exposed themselves. That's not how the census works. It's again, we've mentioned, one thing I didn't mention here, there is something called Title 13 that covers the Census Bureau. Any requests for data are denied because of the protection from Title 13. It's been tested. When the terrorist attacks happened on September 11th, and Homeland Security asked for Muslim names and numbers, Title 13 barred them from doing that, because that's not how the census data was to be used. And that's the most recent example, but they have other examples that go back well into the 60s. And so it is safe. And there's some other myths that are out there that I usually, sometimes I have a list of myths. I've named about 6 of them. One of them, I'll mention here, people don't think their kids need to be counted. So, and that's a hard one to catch, because they'll count the house, but then they won't count the children. And so then according to the census, they'll check it off and say, oh, well, the house was counted. But then we're like, whoa, but what about the kids? And so that's an important one. If you're in the house, make sure to remind them to count the kids, because the baby, who right now is not taking up a lot of money, perhaps in 10 years, they will be eating a lot more of your food. They're going to be in school and using all the services. And you want to make sure that that child was counted and included, so that that money will be following that child. So that's another one. Some people think immigrants are not supposed to be counted. All residents of New Jersey and of the United States are to be counted. So there's a few myths that we just have to tell people, that's not true, this is true, and that you're important and we really need your count.
I think that's so so important for us to think about a couple of things that you just spoke about. I don't want to lose track of the immigrant piece, though. I know a lot of questions that people have are around undocumented immigrants. And do they participate in the census? Will this in any way affect them? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. So, as mentioned before, there was a question about citizenship. And so back in July of last year, June 30th, July 1st, before that, there was a citizenship question on the decennial census. And that had not been the case for over 50 years. There's other smaller surveys that do have that on there, but that's for a smaller group of people. That is not the decennial census. And so the Institute, along with others, we filed an amicus brief, and there was a lot of different advocates that were against it. And it went up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled that it should be removed from the census, and it was. But by that point, the damage was done. And then there was another executive order that came out about a month, well, I'll just say in the month of August, from a presidential executive order that talked about undocumented people not being counted for reapportionment. And there was a federal judge, I think just this weekend, that declared that unconstitutional. There's a lot of lawsuits that are going on around that. But while all of that is going on, immigrants, non-documented, documented, everyone should be counted. And they are counted for funding, and they are counted for reapportionment. And so while all of that smoke is going on, everyone should still be counted.
I think that's so important. And I feel like that's often what we lose sight of, that we're sort of in the day-to-day, we're dealing with a global pandemic, we're faced with homeschooling, we're faced with all of these really challenging issues, but we sort of lose track of that long game, right? And if 2020 has shown us anything, it's that we should all expect the unexpected.
Yes.
And that it's important to count yourself today, because you just don't know what 21 or 22 or 10 years from now has in store, and what new revenue or programs or offerings that are going to be needed in your community. You just don't know.
You just don't know. You just don't know. And that's a very good point, Jennifer. I mean, that's even another reason why you need to get counted, because whatever we decide today or in these next, 2 weeks, I say 15. Some people say 14 days. I say 15 because I count today as a day that you can actually complete the census. It's going to last for 10 years. So we're making a very serious decision, and it's really up to us. That's the one thing we can do, is complete the census and make sure that whatever happens, that we are prepared as best we can for it.
Yeah, I think that's just like the biggest takeaway, that while we're in the middle of doing all of this stuff today, like we really do still need to keep an eye on our future and make sure that we're protecting the right to vote and all of the other things.
Yes.
I'm just looking through a couple of the other questions that have come in. Another one in terms of mobilizing. For social workers who might be interested in sort of getting that last push in, are there resources that they can take to their organizations, or are there other people who can come in and speak to their groups or organizations or their populations if they wanted to do something similar, like on a Facebook Live or something?
Yes, I just put my website in the chat, and so people can definitely look at all of the flyers that we have. And as I mentioned in the beginning, I'm part of a larger Census 2020 NJ coalition, which is all the different demographics. We all work together, but we're also, we have our specific focus. But at the end of the day, we go, if someone with the Advocates for Children of New Jersey, who's the lead can't speak at a certain place, I go. We're all for everyone getting counted. We have specific areas that we focus on, but overall, we're basically saying the same thing. We just might have to tweak the message slightly for our audience. So we are very busy right now, but we are very happy to find someone that can help move the information along for you. But again, we have resources that you can print. You can certainly ask us any questions if there's any questions like the one that I'm looking up in terms of the disabled. Just let us know and we can get the information back to you. We're also in close contact with the Census Bureau, and if you want to put something together and have what they call a CRR, which is a census response representative, come, they can literally sit and they can take the census, quote unquote, with the person, because they're actually with the Census Bureau and they have the special oath and everything that they need. So if that's something that you would like to do, either through your organization or through your city's complete count committee or some sort of group, that is something where we can connect you with your census partnership specialist, and they can send someone out to assist you as well.
That's fantastic. I know a lot of social workers will be interested in that resource. One of the other questions that we have that came in was sort of regarding Get Out the Count events. Are there any events planned in various cities, or if so, do you know where we can find any of those in the next 14/15 days?
I put together, yes, there are a lot of things going on. There's some that are online. So I have a calendar of most of the things I'm doing, but there's also some other ones as well. In particularly those 11 cities, I'll just give you some examples. There's a Census Family Sundays reunion. I think I had those words mixed up, but it's a family reunion Sunday, but it's for the census. They've had one every Sunday since the first Sunday of September. And 2 of the Sundays they have webinars, and for all 4 of the Sundays, they've been meeting in different parks in some of the different, and these are clergy. This is by the Interfaith Action Movement, which is led by Governor Murphy's, one of his advisors, faith advisors. And so they go to different parts of the state and they have food. Food is always a good draw. Yeah. So if you're going to have something where you want people, I recommend food, sometimes music. If you're able to get masks, or something else from the Census Bureau and get some handouts, that's always good. But you do want the materials that show people why the census is important, perhaps how to take it, and all the contact information needed. And so we the Institute, we can provide things like that. There's still those car caravans. And we still have to remember we are in the middle of a pandemic. And so we're not doing everything that would be, the big festivals and the things of that nature. We can't do those. So whatever we're doing them with socially distant ideas in mind. And so, but there are a lot of things going on. I can definitely forward that, at least the schedule that I have, to you, Jennifer. So there'll be some idea of some of the things going on. A lot of the things are webinars, and I have some interviews with radio stations as well. Right. And so if you see a city that is on the list that would benefit from hearing some of these things, you can advertise those as well. So even though we're not actually sitting in the same place, we could do something just like this, where we're getting more people to hear the different messages, and they have the opportunity to ask questions in the chat room about anything.
I think it's this pandemic has been so challenging in some ways, but in a lot of ways has also made it easier for us to come together and share this information.
Sure.
And mobilize in very different ways. And I think one of the things that we're hopeful from today's conversation is that the social workers who are really on the ground trying to mobilize in their communities will take the information from our Facebook chat and be able to share it with their organizations and, you know, not have to recreate the wheel, so to speak, and have another conversation. They can share it, they can send this link out, and it'll be a tool that's readily accessible. And so hopefully we've answered a lot of their questions as well.
And I think, the social workers, that's an awesome opportunity to do it, because, and now granted, my mother did this a very, very long time ago. I don't want to say, because then you know how old I am, but when I know that people literally go into other people's houses, and even sometimes there's nurses that come with you to go into the houses. They truly trust you. And so if they already trust you with so many things that are important to them, if they know that this is important to you as well, I would certainly say on your next visit to please ask them, you know, have you taken the census, and take one of our flyers and just give it to them, just to give them that option. And if they've done it, great. There's probably a good chance they know someone that hasn't, but just to have the conversation means a lot. And it'll let them know that you think they're important as well.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. And we are actually almost wrapping up. An hour goes by so quickly.
Yes.
But I really just want to thank you so much for the important work that you're doing. You know, I'm always reminded of, I love hip hop and rap music. And there's this artist, T-Pain, and I think that's him. That might be wrong. But there's this really great artist who's Yellow Pain, that's his name, sorry.
Okay.
But he talks about political activism, and he talks about the census and why it's so important for just everyone to know, but particularly young people, why you have to get involved in this, why it's all connected, how the census ties to the election and ultimately the services that you have in your community. And it's such a critical piece, but often gets lost in the conversation. So I'm really grateful for your thoughts and the work that you're doing, because it is absolutely essential.
You're more than welcome. Thank you so much for having me. I truly appreciate the opportunity to speak to you and NASW. My pleasure.
Well, thank you so much. And we look forward to continued conversations with you about these important it's an important topic, and we'll do everything we can in the next 15 days to make sure that everyone is counted.
Okay. Thank
you.